So welcome back from the coffee break with another long journey of cloud to cloud, in this case, from two cloud architects at Austrian Post. Now, personally, I have to say, I did not associate the Post, well, I'm not Austrian, but I did not also associate the Post with cloud native. And I'm really looking forward to see what you're telling us, because it's web services to Kubernetes.
Yes.
And well, tell us more about it. Big applause for Benedikt Kittinger and Michael Kellner.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're going to tell a little story. Disclaimer up front, it's not a tech talk. We're talking about organization, financials, strategy, and all other things. And telling the story of how we migrated around about 500 Azure App Services to Kubernetes in 6 months. So, yeah. So who we are, real quick, I'm Benedikt. I'm head of the Cloud Center of Excellence at Austrian Post. And we in the Cloud Center of Excellence, we own and provide cloud services to dev teams and others at Austrian Post. And we also build and operate the internal Kubernetes platform. And I'm joined today by Michael.
Hey everybody.
Who's a platform engineer in the Cloud Center of Excellence and manages our Kubernetes platform. So, ASE you later. What's ASE? Quick introduction, ASE, Azure App Service Environment. We've heard about Azure Functions earlier today. Azure App Service Environment is a hosting environment in Azure that allows you to isolate your web apps, your functions, your Linux applications, containers, whatnot, from other customers and even from other things in your own environment. And we've been heavily using that since 2018. Until the version we were using was deprecated, which meant we had to migrate. And that brings up the obvious question. I mean, there was a successor, there was a newer version. Why didn't we just use that? And the reasons were that we were lacking isolation in shared environments that we had. And also, we took the opportunity to go Kubernetes because it reduces our vendor lock-in. It makes us more flexible. It enables things like hybrid and multi-cloud. We're not bound to things like Azure Functions. As we saw in the morning, there are similarities, there are differences, so you can just take the thing and migrate it to, I don't know, AWS or Google Cloud or on-prem or wherever you want. And the third one was cost. I'm not going to bore you with too many slides now, but basically, just how much more expensive is it? This is the smallest hosting environment you can get on the old environment. That cost about 200 euros a month. So if we just went to the new version, the price would have increased by 90%. Now you can reduce that by committing for 1 or 3 years. You could get down to about the same cost, but then you've committed for 3 years, so that's not really a fair comparison. And then we did the calculations, okay, what about Kubernetes, even if we host it on Azure? And we saw, well, if we go Kubernetes, we can actually reduce our cost, even if we assume a crazy amount of overhead and work to be added. And then you can do the reservation trick once again and go down way further. So that's another compelling argument why we might do it. Right.
Well, at least so much for the theory, but as always, it doesn't work out that smoothly. The first big hurdle that we had to overcome was the time. We started our migration in the end of February, beginning of March, and since Microsoft is going to turn off our app services, it had to be done by the end of August, beginning of September. So there was no do-overs, no second tries. It's done if we don't make it by that point. So 6 months. On top of that, we don't migrate just 1 or 2 or even a dozen app services. We want to migrate 500 of them, which at the time were native Azure functions, so most of them were not actually containerized. That was another thing that added to the workload for that. And I assume you know that, being at a Kubernetes talk, But Kubernetes has a learning curve, let's call it like that. And unfortunately, most of our development teams did not have that experience. They just started from scratch for the most part. And our supporting team was at the time 5 people, I think, only 3 of which actually had Kubernetes experience. So the other 2 were beginning with that as well. So that's 6 months for 500 applications, 3 people to support that, and with teams that did not really know how to do it. So, what's the plan? Well, let's first talk briefly, don't worry, about how we actually run Kubernetes, because that is relevant later. So right now we have 6 hosted Kubernetes clusters in Azure, which are offered as a platform to our teams. They don't have to run it ourselves. We do it for them. And while we were migrating all of that, the only thing that we did migrate was compute. So all of the other fancy stuff, databases, key vaults, whatever, that would remain as hosted Azure services. It was just purely the code, the compute that we were going to Kubernetes with. So our clusters, if you're worried about, hey, that's a 6 for 500 applications, there's like a 0 or 2 missing. But that's not the case. We actually share our clusters between all teams. So what we do is we create small, self-contained, isolated environments that we call tenants. We are running Linkerd and Capsule with that. And whenever we onboard a team on the cluster, they go into one of these tenants. So to them, it looks like they have their own little cluster inside of their own cluster. That also helps us in terms of it enables teams to do everything themselves. They own the environment. They can deploy stuff. They can delete resources. They can send up their own permissions and stuff. So basically, they are the administrators of their own little clusters.
Yeah, so the other one. What we did is also we thought about, okay, well, now we create an environment that we provide to teams. We might as well add features and make it a nice story for them. So everyone gets a feature. And for that, we also looked at the cloud-native ecosystem, and 2 that Michi already mentioned were Capsule and Linkerd for our multi-tenancy requirements and network isolation and stuff like that. But we added more. Initially, we had cured, however, to basically restart our nodes. Don't need it anymore. That has been gone for a year now, but we still wanted to mention it. There's now a native solution in the Microsoft platform for that. We use HashiCorp Vault. We use Cert Manager to automatically issue certificates to our workloads to basically manage everything, so teams don't have to worry about creating and renewing certificates. That's handled for them. We've integrated external DNS, so we also have DNS integration going alongside with that. We have an ingress controller, so basically you just define your host name. We create the certificate, we create the DNS record, and you're just ready to go within 1 minute, usually around about. And we have kube cost because, yeah, you're going to have to pay for that. So that's kind of the features. Some of them people like, some of them they probably don't like as much, billing maybe. What else did we do? We enabled teams. We enabled them through training. We provided them with information regarding the CNCF online trainings, the Getting Started with Kubernetes courses. We did training subscription with the Linux Foundation for around about 50 people at Austrian Post to get them trained and certified as a Kubernetes application developer. And we also did an on-site administrator training for our platform team and operations teams to basically get up the knowledge and get up to speed there. And that all enabled us to support teams, as we mentioned earlier. Our support capacity was quite limited, yet we still did regular support sessions. We did individual support on request. We established a community of practice in MS Teams, which was a really nice way of working together. And we did documentation.
Yes, and that documentation came in 2 flavors. One is our quick start templates, which is simply speaking just a small isolated pre-made environment that you could just copy as a team and you were ready to go with your Kubernetes application in like 15 minutes. So this would contain like a Helm chart with all the resources, Linkerd stuff, deployment, all the good stuff. It comes with a deployment pipeline, and depending on the application, it also comes with additional Azure resources. These were for the basic use cases, like we had a cron job template, we had an application template for C# with a ingress, stuff like that. And the second one was our more traditional wiki documentation, which we basically wanted to have everything documented that developers could come across if they were using Kubernetes in our environment. So we ended up with a lot of documentation. And one of the nuggets of feedback that we got was, hey, this wiki page is written like a medieval treatise, which, by the way, is a long formal piece of writing about a particular subject. And we had to Google that. That was not easy feedback to get through. So not only do you need to have a lot of documentation, it should also be easy to understand for somebody who doesn't actually know how to work with Kubernetes. So use small words. But guess what? It worked. It worked fine at the end. We managed to migrate all of our applications by the end of August. And since we're here talking about this, that should probably tell you that it did, otherwise we'd have canceled that talk. By the way, when we submitted it, that was not clear. We submitted it in like mid-June or something.
Yeah.
So we were in the midst of it. So, it worked out. So, what did we learn from all of that? First of all, start early. And I know what you're all thinking. We have a slide about that later. Start early. And when you start early, start a bit earlier, because you will not have enough time. But because of that, because of this really tight time frame, we actually noticed that teams were kind of fused together. Teams started helping each other out. So we really had a lot of collaboration there.
Yeah, okay. So the obvious question that we just put up here, because it would come otherwise, why didn't you start earlier? So, I mean, that didn't come as a surprise earlier this year that an environment is going to be deprecated. The plans were known. Couple of reasons. So basically, our internal platform, as we mentioned, we also had to build up the knowledge to do that and build that platform. And the MVP for that in production was ready in like September. And if you know something about Austrian Post, and I think Post in many countries, there is something like that high season and Christmas and things going on. So we actually have a change freeze where we do not do big production changes between November and January, because we like to not break things during the busiest time of the year. So that's why we started with the migration to Kubernetes right in January, did the training, did the migration, started there, because we just weren't ready earlier. Another thing we learned was reporting matters. So if you have a big scary thing like 500 possible app services going down in like 6 months, people are going to get nervous, really nervous. So having a report to keep track of progress and show to people and say, hey, it's not that bad, we're making progress, is important. It doesn't need to be fancy or automated or anything. You just need to have it. You need to make sure that people are using it. And you need to recruit stakeholders to actually keep it up to date. And this is an actual screenshot from our report, from our enterprise architecture repository, where you can kind of see a progress, where some things are done, some in progress, others are planned. And you can also see something which is not everything went to Kubernetes, actually. There were things that we actually upgraded to the new version, which we're going to also talk about. So, back to you, Michi.
Thank you. So, if you remember back for the first time when you used Kubernetes, you probably still remember that warm, fuzzy feeling when you thought like, yeah, screw this, I'm going back to Docker Compose. This is not worth it. A lot of teams face that as well. Basically what I'm saying is that Kubernetes has a learning curve. And usually if you get starting with it, that's a learning wall that you have to jump over. And what we noticed is that the first application that each team would migrate from ASE to Kubernetes usually took between 1 to 2.5 weeks, so that was relatively constant. But once they did that, once they have all the know-how, the tools, the templates that they could just copy from, that learning curve really just flattened out, and everything after that just went one after the other. But teams, of course, how could they? Did not know that, so they would often overestimate their total workload, and we were getting like astronomical expectations in terms of how much that time is going to take. So if you work with teams that don't know how much work it will take, you kind of had to steer a little back. And speaking of steering, another thing that we noticed is that developers, like everybody really, kind of likes to do things in the least effort way, which, fair enough, and you can use that. So one thing that we did was we extensively used our templates that I mentioned before to just make sure that teams are doing the things that we want them to do in the way that we want them to do. Because if somebody wanted to set up a new application in Kubernetes, we're just like, go over there, copy that template, point it to your Docker image, change a couple of values, deploy it, and you're done, basically. And on top of that, we also learned that you get a lot of less headwind if you use your laser pointer, so to speak. So we like to think of that making a cat go where you want it to go is hard. Making a cat follow the dot where you want it to go is less hard. Not easy, but less hard. So what I'm saying is that if you want your application, your platform to be adopted by teams, try to work with a carrot rather than a stick. More practically, what we did is we had a look at common pain points and found out, for example, that it is a real pain point for our teams that you would need to set up a DNS record, you would need to get certificates, you would need to tie all of that together with a web server. And to alleviate that for them, we would just automate all of that away in Kubernetes, and we were like, you don't have to do none of that stuff. Just come to our application, come to our platform, set up a couple of annotations, and you're good to go. All of that is automated away for you. And what really was helpful for us is that the few people that we had in our team that were not actually very experienced in Kubernetes. So that seemed weird at first, but we learned that this is a godsend for our documentation. So we just sat them down, we gave them an application to migrate, and we only gave them tools that a development team would have to also do the same thing. And in the end, this feedback that we got was really helpful. So we were able to rapidly iterate and improve on our documentation on that. Because, and that is a major point, enablement is way more important than support. Like every question that you can answer before a development team actually asks the question is something that you don't have to take out time of your day to answer it for them over and over again. But of course, support still is critical, and by that I mean active support. But basically, you want to get to a point where all the cookie cutter, all the easy stuff is already pre-solved for developers, and you only want to get active when, when the complicated problems arise, when actually support is needed. And we really did that with our community of practice, which is a fancy way of saying a Teams channel. But what we had there was we invited all of our tenants into that channel. If they have a question, they can just ask it there. And not only do we help them solve that issue, but other teams also jumped in once they had the first initial migration done for them. So all the support that the teams got was usually done in like hours, usually even faster than that.
Yeah, and coming back to those like orange things on the report, things that don't go to Kubernetes, pick your battles. Some things are not going to work on Kubernetes, or at least not easily. And forcing the triangle into the square hole does not really work that well and will hurt you eventually. So you will need exceptions, things that are just maybe a bit older on frameworks that don't run on Linux. So yes, you could use Windows nodes in Kubernetes. Do you want to? I don't know. We didn't want to, so we said, okay, if you require a Windows runtime environment, stay where you are, you're good. If you can run on Linux, come here. But exceptions are just that. They are exceptions, yeah. For Austrian Post in general, having a consistent tech stack and not introducing technologies left and right and everyone uses whatever they want is a priority, because it enables us to be more flexible with placing workloads and so on. So you have to make it explicit that an exception is an exception, and you still need to be strict about, yes, Kubernetes is the target. If you have the feeling you might not be able to do that, come talk to us. Bring your arguments why you think that. Maybe we can help you. Maybe we have a solution. Maybe we can talk about it, work something out, and just limit the exceptions to those cases where you might need them. So one of the examples, because we were talking about Azure Functions a bit, was a very large microservice-based application that runs on something like, I don't know, 26 different function apps with I don't know how many functions in there. We decided to not migrate that because that would have basically been way too hard. So yeah, that's it from us. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, yes.
Yeah, 1 second, you need the microphone, otherwise I need to repeat it. Just fourth
Or
row.
just yell really loud.
How did you keep your wiki up to date?
So how did you keep your wiki up to date? It's for the YouTube.
We actually tried to be ahead of the curve, so to speak. So what we did is we used this Teams channel, and whenever we found something that is a pattern, something that teams would ask multiple times or in different variations, we would just go document that and make sure that it just doesn't crop up again the next time somebody asks the same thing. It's solved for you.
Yeah, but keeping wikis up to date is super hard, especially the older pages. One thing we actually are doing now for more important pages, not for everything, just add a line on the top that says this was reviewed last at this date, so you at least know it's out of date.
Okay, I'll just repeat it.
Did you do multi-tenancy using Azure or inside of Kubernetes?
Did you use multi-tenancy inside Azure or did you use Kubernetes?
No, Michi, maybe.
So yes, we are doing it inside of Kubernetes. We're using k8s for that, and that is basically an off-the-shelf solution. That is not a Azure thing. It's inside Kubernetes.
And a CNCF project.
And a CNCF project.
Thanks for the talk.
The mic is not on. But I can also repeat it.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Thanks for the talk. I was wondering how much time it cost to integrate all the tools that you have running inside Kubernetes and to interface with Azure services like DNS, as you mentioned.
I mean, we can tell you when we're done. So that was when we started with Kubernetes, one of the most time-intensive things. We were only really done with our MVP by the end of September last year. And before that, we were running it for a year just to get up and running. And we're still integrating more things and try to make them run smoothly. So it's a time investment.
But to be fair, like integration with Azure services was pretty straightforward, I would say.
Oh yeah.
So we're using a couple of other things that we didn't mention yet. So we're using workload identity to basically mimic managed identities in Azure in Kubernetes. So we could basically port that functionality over. DNS was, I think, done in a day or something, the first setup.
I think I just told you that it was done like that, but...
Okay, so I think it was done in a day. But yeah, that was one of the easier things. I think the things that we did inside Kubernetes and plumbing all those things together, that was actually the harder part.
Any further questions? Otherwise, I would have one for now. So you mentioned that it was also maybe a good cleanup exercise. So can you estimate how much things that you actually noticed you might not necessarily need?
Yes, wait, let me just go back like, I don't know, 15 slides. We actually did that in reporting. You can see that black one, retire, replace. In total, it was out of the 500 app services that mapped to 70-something applications. And out of those, in total, 2, 5, and 1 added later, so 6 applications we completely got rid of. Because we actually, one quote I got was, if I have to migrate that, no, I'm just gonna turn it off. It's not that important. So yes, that happens. And we also found a lot of stale things, removed things, cleaned up, housekeeping. So yeah. Going through your entire environment to look at everything is actually a quite nice exercise to clean up.
Thank you for your answer. Any further questions? Well, in this case, a very, very interesting talk of how migrations, even if they're sort of forced upon you, can actually lead to good endings. And thank you very much. Big applause, please, for the speakers from Austrian Post.
Thank you.
Benedikt and Michael. And also the Post is sponsoring us, so thank you very, very much also for supporting the community events here.
Of course.